For most of our country's history, the Bible was found in every classroom in the nation. Yet in many schools today, students are instead indoctrinated with anti-religious propaganda, and some are even punished for their religious beliefs, and very, very strongly punished. It's ridiculous.
President Trump promoting religious liberty at the Museum of the Bible in Washington this morning. His appearance there follows a bombshell report from the Department of Justice. This report accuses the Biden administration of weaponizing the government against Christians on numerous occasions. The report finds the previous administration, quote, deprioritized, mishandled, or denied requests for religious exemptions to its COVID-19 mandate. It also says the Biden White House tried to impose record-breaking fines on some of the nation's largest Christian universities and did not try to address and prosecute violations of the law where anti-Christian bias was demonstrated by the persecutors. Now, this morning, Attorney General Pam Bondi said things have changed under President Trump.
Under his leadership, we have dropped FACE cases against pro-life Christians, stopped the FBI from spying on Catholics, launched multiple investigations into anti-Semitism in schools. President Trump is fighting each day for our parents, our students, and every American's right to live out their faith.
You know, Jeremy, we all witnessed this firsthand. Justice Alito called COVID-19 a constitutional stress test. He said it highlighted disturbing trends that were already present before the virus struck. And one of those trends was stomping on our freedoms, our rights to gather as churches. And I remember in the wake of COVID, when Amy Coney Barrett got to the court, California was struck down 5 times on the issue of religious liberty. One case, Tandem v. Newsom, where California sought to regulate the number of Christians who could gather in a home and pray.
Yeah. I mean, it is, and even if, as you said, even going back even before COVID, even during the Obama era, you saw a lot of these kind of scandals involving the IRS and things like that. And I remember, you know, my father's a pastor. I've talked about it a little bit on the air. And I remember during that era, being in church, my dad, you know, having the courage to say, look, we are still going to call out the President Obama on actions that he was taking that are against our biblical values. But we lost a lot of members of the church. I mean, as you can imagine, it's not popular to criticize Obama at a black church. But my dad stood on values. And I think about now, I think the purpose behind a lot of this, what was Biden doing? Why are they, you know, violating religious exemptions for Christians? It's because they want to bully Christians into being quiet. They want to bully us into silence. They don't want pastors to speak from the pulpit about any issue that has any type of political undertone. But there are some issues that are moral issues that pastors should be able to speak about and can do that and exercise their First Amendment rights. And I think it's important that as believers, we don't cower back and say, oh, I'm afraid the government is going to, you know, do something against me. Or no, we have to stand on principle, stand on the Bible and speak truth, even if it's inconvenient for us.
Yeah, without question. You know, Kennedy, I want to play a moment of President Trump from his first administration. And I remember one Friday he called me into the Oval Office, and I had prepared a whole briefing about another topic, and he said, we're going to go to the podium and do something a little different today. And this was right after COVID hit. He said, here's what I'm going to do. Watch this.
Today, I'm identifying houses of worship, churches, synagogue, and mosques as essential places that provide essential services. Some governors have deemed the liquor stores and abortion clinics as essential, but have left out churches. I call upon governors to allow our churches and places of worship to open right now.
I mean, the press went nuts, but he stood for the First Amendment even when it was tough.
Yeah, but that's a constitutionally protected gathering and expression. And I understand why they wanted to keep the liquor stores open, but they really targeted churches. And, you know, it was no surprise when we heard during the Biden administration that one of the FBI field offices had sent out a memo targeting Catholics, the radical traditionalist Catholics who are somehow now a terrorist organization. And Christopher Wray went before Congress and was like, what? I've never heard of such a thing. I'm disgusted. And then, you know, they did a deeper dive, and there was a congressional investigation this year, and they found that yes, in fact, that investigation was wider spread, involved more field offices, and it absolutely, you know, this government agency, this federal law enforcement, was targeting Catholics. And that's the issue a lot of people had. It started in COVID, it took root, and unfortunately blossomed during the Biden administration. administration.
And you know, he targeted Catholics, the DOJ did, and Harris, there was a targeting of the pro-life community, and we've talked about it on this couch. I interviewed some of those protesters that President Trump let out in his first few days of office. One of them was William Goodman. Imagine this, the DOJ did not accuse this man of violence. No accusation of violence against William Goodman, but he's sentenced to federal prison, and here's what happened.
Wasn't Bravo unit, it was actually a unit that had been condemned. We went over 2 weeks without toilet paper, and some of the guys mentioned that some of the men who were there with gender dysphoria wearing dresses, they could get mascara, lipstick, and perfume, but we couldn't even get toilet paper or basic needs, so there was a lot of neglect.
Yeah, so what's interesting about that, excellent get on that, an interview there, and important because it dovetails into what I was going to bring up. So you've got Christians being called radical because they hold traditional values, those Catholics that you mentioned, Kennedy, yet mutilating the genitals of minors so that their outsides can somehow mimic the confusion and hurt and immature ideas because they are minors yet, so that those two things can go together is absolutely not radical and okay with the left. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. So you're going to satisfy the whims of people in prison, but not those who are supposed to walk out with the American freedoms that we all have. It is more than hypocritical. It is brainwashing. It is brainwashing an entire country because of a few. And if Democrats think that this is a winning issue for them, if they think they're in the majority, cue the tape every day, all day long of November 2024. Show them that they cannot win on this issue, and they won't. And I like the fact that the president then leaned in today that this is where we are. We're going forward. We're not going to stay stuck where we were because it wasn't right.
Yeah, you know, Cheryl, it is quite a juxtaposition. On one hand, let's stomp on the First Amendment rights of millions of Americans. On the other hand, let's go on a grand experiment with America's children and allow them to get vasectomies.
You know, freedom of religion. These are our rights as U.S. citizens. This is the Constitution. And it frustrates me that the Biden administration, based on what I'm reading from this task force, thought that it was okay to go against that. And this is what, if you mentioned this earlier, Kaylee, I apologize, but under DHS, when they omitted Christian perspectives from a directive for detainees, this is Customs and Border Protection, ding ding, this is illegal migration, immigration, but they noted accommodations for Islam, Rastafarianism, and sects of Judaism. So that is targeting. That is religious targeting based on who you say that you are, and that's what I find the most offensive. What are we, Syria? Where they're targeting Christians? That's what this reminded me of when I looked at that particular piece of the evidence from the task force. I believe in the separation of church and state. I always have. I wish that the Biden administration had believed it more at the time. But obviously, they took the rights of the few as more important than the rights of the